The next step was a lot of, being beaten down by investors.
How did I know you were going to say that?
Fundraising is a very difficult process. We had no experience in it, and it's particularly what we learned was it's particularly difficult for female founders for many reasons. Both conscious and unconscious bias exists in that capital raising process, and we would go and pitch this, outsource your household chores. Isn't life difficult?
To a whole lot of 60-year-old men.
And they just go like, no, I don't get it.
Who cares?
Not relevant to me. My wife does that.
Didn't think to maybe go back and ask their wives, what do you think of this idea?
Yeah.
But anyway.
And so we had, it was a difficult process. We did ultimately raise a seed round of $500,000, which was great, and enabled us to really, make progress on our platform, bring all the tech in-house. And then kind of prep ourselves for that next round. And when we were going to raise our next round of capital, we knew something needed to change. We just didn't quite know what it was. But we didn't want to go through that kind of soul-destroying process we had the first time. So,
oh, right. So in terms of the change you needed, you thought, we're going to try and do this in a different way.
Yeah, we're going to try and do this in a different way. There's something we're quite not getting about. We knew when we would go and pitch it, we would get this blank stare and no interest. We just didn't understand. It was a good business. We were making a lot of money. We were getting a lot of customers. We were growing. There was huge opportunity. We could see the same kinds of companies internationally, booming. So what was it about the way we were pitching for funding that wasn't working? And the thing is, pitching for funding is it's a presentation. It's a sales process. It's storytelling. So
what did you think you were doing wrong?
We didn't.
Just as a matter of interest, because there's been a hell of a lot of women who were maybe going to do it for the first time too.
Well, so what we did was we went and did the Springboard Tech Accelerator program, because that is specifically for female founders, and it's specifically around making a business ready to raise that next round of capital and providing the skills that women need to go and raise capital. And that was where we had our aha moment, where we realized that we were telling a room full of men about this emotive story, and women tend to tell their stories emotionally. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And so we say, it changes our life. It's such a burden having to do all of this unpaid work around the house, and that's great, but actually...
And the guys are going, how many customers have you got? What's your bottom line? Tell us your profit margin. You're going, hang on, let us tell you the story first.
Exactly. And they want to know numbers because, and this is such an obvious insight, but investors want to make money. They're there to make money. So the idea is important, and the reason you did it is important, and the team is important, but at the end of the day, it needs to be able to provide them with that 10x return to make it, if you're looking for venture funding, that's what you need to be able to prove. And so instead of telling that emotive story, we would say that we were doubling month on month, that our customers, 60% of our bookings every month were repeat business, that customers... our churn was below 2%, all of these things the market was $15 billion in Australia, all of these things which showed this could be a really big business.
Yeah, nice cold hard number kind of. Yep. And even as you're saying it now, I go, oh yeah, absolutely. Who wouldn't want to invest in that? Exactly. It's funny, isn't it? Because you don't see it when it's yourself or if you're in a small team, but as soon as somebody else says it, you go, of course that's the way we should be presenting it.
And even now, I see so many women's pitch decks and it's all words instead of numbers. And it's just such an obvious insight, but tell me the story through numbers. That's what we need to be doing when we raise money.
Wow, that's just a great bit of advice. Tell the story through numbers. Okay. And so how did you go with that raise then?
So within 2 weeks of finishing Springboard, we raised our $1 million round. It was a very different experience for us. And then we just pushed the accelerator on our business, and we kind of in the next 18 months scaled Australia-wide, started acquiring competitors to really accelerate that growth trajectory. For us, I think we saw that it was really important to stay close to your competitors rather than treat them as your enemy. And I think that's a lot of common mistake that people make. They're like, oh, this person's doing the same thing as me. I want to stay away from them. But we stayed close to to everybody in our space. And so when some opportunities came up to acquire some competitors, we were able to have first look at those and jump onto them. And
that's just so amazing, because I have always, for years and years and years, been saying to people, don't think about competitors, think about collaboration. But I had never thought that, of course, then you know people that you could acquire as well. But I mean, I'm a big fan of keep your enemies closer. You know, like you might as well try and do something in that space with the person if you can, rather than competing for customers.
Absolutely. And I think in the sector that we were in, you know, we were watching what was happening internationally, and we could see consolidation was a clear trend, that there were a lot of small players in the markets, but ultimately kind of, and this happens in most marketplaces, there's kind of one winner. Especially in Australia, the market's not really big enough to sustain lots of smaller players in a space. We usually end up with like a Seek or a Car Sales, you know, or a Domain kind of dominating a space. And so, that was kind of the strategy that we had. And for us, the strategy was ultimately, we think one of the bigger players is going to come and acquire a company in Australia, and we wanted to be the biggest player locally to position ourselves to be that target. And that's kind of what happened.
I love your strategies. They're just so good. So, how does that work? So do you just kind of get an email one day from someone saying, hi, we'd like to have a chat, we might like to buy your company? Or did you actually go out looking for it? Or how does it work? Because that would be so exciting.
So we were raising capital. We were doing a capital raise, and we were pretty close to closing on it when we got a approach from Oneflare, and they said that they were looking to build an on-demand capability, but they tried and they saw that it was very, very difficult to do well, because there's a lot of nuance in it. And could we have a chat about working together? You guys were doing it really well. Yeah, yep. And so that's
amazing.
That's how it all happened. And so
I feel all shaky just hearing this, because that would be so exciting.
It was a great outcome.
It must have been such an awesome day when that first inquiry came.
Look, you know what? It's hard as well. I think giving control up of your baby. And letting, that's also a tough thing to do, because we'd raised it up and, so we stayed involved.
So had you started the business thinking that you wanted to sell it, or was it kind of the idea, so it really was a baby that you thought that you might have 10 years later?
Well, this is, I think, also an important point about raising investment, is that if you bring on external investors, you need to be aware that the way they make money, the way they realise a gain on their investment is by an exit. And
so you do need to sort of plan that exit before, before you go too long. I mean, I get that.
Yeah. And so if you want to build a business that you want to hold on to forever, it's not, taking external investment is something you should think carefully about. So it can happen. I mean, and there's unicorn examples of Atlassian and Canva where certainly there are other ways for investors to realise, sell some shares along the way. But generally speaking, most exits in Australia happen by a trade sale, like a kind of mid-level trade sale, and that's something which is good. It depends what you want to do, but that's a path you go down, and that's a conscious decision I think you make when you take on external investors.
Right. So how long did you have the business for altogether?
We had it for 6 years. Yeah.
Oh, great. That's a good number as well. And so what happens when you've exited a business that's obviously taken up all your time and energy for the previous 6 years, and you've got this pile of money, but you no longer have that day-to-day kind of stuff you've got to do? What do you think? What are you thinking? What are you going to do? What did you do?
Well, it was tough because I was so used to being busy all the time. I threw myself into a kind of learning. I did my AICD company directors course, and I wanted to learn about angel investing. It took me probably about 3 months to really wind down and go, it's actually quite nice having some time back in my day. But one of the things I'd become involved in along the way. So, I did the Springboard Accelerator program, but I became very passionate about helping other female founders in their journeys. And so and they'd asked me to join the board actually, the same year I did the program. And so I'd become quite involved in that ecosystem around female founders. And it was a good opportunity for me to spend some time giving back to the ecosystem. So I did a lot of mentoring. I still do with, UNSW founders. I did an entrepreneur in residence stint at UTS startups. I did StartMate. I do StartMate. I mentor there and I'm invested there. And so I spent a lot of time doing that. And one of the things that I came to see was that, we run a lot of programs for female founders and help them skill up and everything. And that's super important. And I think having those, you can't be what you can't see. So having role models and seeing other women do startups and build businesses is very, very important. But there's still a gap in funding, and the stats are really awful. So less than 3% of venture funding globally goes to women. And actually this year that number went down.
It's absolutely horrendous. Why do you think that? I mean, I know that some of the arguments that I hear are because, 80 or 95% of investors are men as well. But why do you think that is? Do you think women exit from businesses in general and go off and do a whole other life and don't think about going back in? Or why is it so heavily dominated by men?
I think that there's a few reasons. I think often women don't have that same ambition to build really big companies. As you said, like a lot of women think we should build lifestyle companies that we can run while we're doing other things, and don't see the opportunity sometimes. So changing the way women perceive opportunity is really important, and that's where those role models, I think, come into play.
Absolutely.
I think another reason is that often having a funded business means you need a tech co-founder, and women in general aren't the tech co-founder. They're the, business person or the product person or the marketing person. And so getting more women studying STEM at early stages is going to be important for getting more women to build technology businesses.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then often, as we say, I'll see two pitch decks, one by a man, one by a woman, and the man will go, this is a massive opportunity and I'm the person to take it there and this is going to be huge. And the woman will say, well, I'm going to give you some conservative numbers. I don't want to overestimate anything.
Yeah. I wonder whether, obviously that's what I'm trying to do with this as well, inspire women and get them to see that there are loads of women out there doing amazing things. But I wonder how we can shift that mindset to be thinking global and to be thinking big, because having a lifestyle is great, but you can still have a lifestyle and build a big business and then get out of it and basically either reinvest or have a great life where you're not compelled to have to work. So I wonder what it is or how we can change that mentality.
And look, that Springboard does
women.
A lot of work. Springboard and a lot of the other accelerators are trying to do that. So we're trying to show women that there is global opportunity for their business and all of that. But I think a really important thing, as you mentioned, is having more women making investment decisions, because a big part of it is a lot of the ideas that women have, businesses that they start, are to solve problems that they've experienced. And men don't often connect with that problem. So let's just say, a couple of good examples recently, Modibody, the period undies, or, Ovira, which has like a period pain relief. It's, really hard to get men to understand these problems. So
and some of the other ones that I see a lot of are domestic violence kind of services and things like that also guys probably feel a little bit uncomfortable being around. I just wonder, but one of the things that I'm interested in, you talk about how investors are all interested in stories by numbers, but that women like to talk about words. Do you think if we had more female investors that they would be more, so that pitch decks don't have to always be about numbers, that we can tell more of a story and take someone along the journey? Or do you think the kind of women that are going to invest, or it's always going to be a numbers driven thing?
Look, I think there's no doubt that an investor, whatever gender, is looking to make money. So the numbers will always be important. But I think being able to, as a female, being able to pitch to a woman, you can definitely, that storytelling is important as well. And they'll be able to connect on a different level with your problem. And they can then you know, that whether if they're an angel, they control that investment decision, but if they're associated with a fund, they can be your champion in that fund, which, you know, may have other men involved in that investment decision process, but at least you have a woman on side with you taking your story forward. So that's kind of was my driver for starting to get involved in investing, because you know, I feel really passionately about changing those stats. And I think the more women we have making investment decisions, the more progress we can make at getting more women funded.